friend. Today we are going to be talking with Kris, who wrote this amazing book. Really good book, by the way, if you haven't ever read it. It's all for editing tips and tricks for your going through your book and everything. So I'm going to be chatting with her today. This is going to be a fun little chat, and we're going to be talking about self-editing and prepping your book for an editor. Let's jump into the interview. I'm super excited to chat with you.
You too. You
Oh,
too.
yay.
Thank you for asking me. I was so honored when I got your email and I was like, oh yay, talking about books and editing. Yes,
Right?
please.
Yeah, it's the best thing to talk about, right?
It really is.
So first of all, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what kind of books you like to edit?
Sure. Well, hi everyone. Again, Devin, thank you so much for inviting me to join you on this. My name is Kris Spisak. I am a fiction editor and an author of 4 books. So I will say briefly, my first 3 books are all writing tips, writing reference, very sexy titles. Yeah, exactly. Like get a grip on your grammar. Sexy,
Yes.
Absolutely sexy.
Love it.
But we get into some details about let's see. I also have the novel editing workbook, which is one of my favorite things to talk about, and also the family story workbook that are really just guides to get you moving in your process, creating stories and diving into stuff. And I actually have my first novel coming out in 2022. I won't talk about that too much now, but I'm very excited. I'm just thrilled to have my story out there as well.
Yeah.
And I've just had a passion for storytelling and writing and telling and empowering stories and communications for as long as I can remember. So that's how I've shaped my life and my career around helping people have that. Maybe they have that dream, maybe they have that hope, maybe they even have that rough draft. And I mean, how awesome is that? And how do we elevate it to the next level in this competitive publishing marketplace, right?
Right. Yeah. That is so good. Oh my gosh. And congratulations on your book, by the way, your fiction book that's coming out. That's so exciting. Okay, and then, so what are your top 5 favorite books of all time?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm one of those people that it really depends on my mood, the year. Let's see. Top 5 books of all time. I'm going to go pull out some classics and some newer ones.
Okay.
So I am going to go with Anna Karenina, Leo Tolstoy. Not because of the page length, and we can go into how voracious readers do love long books, but just the emotional intensity of that book. I just gotta love Russian literature. Let's see, I'm gonna go with Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. When you talk about dreams coming true and realizing your dreams, and I think we as writers have that special moment in our lives where we just have to, you know what, there's so many other things calling to us, but we've just got to write. And that's not what that book's about, but it's all about following dreams. So that's when I think every 5 years or so reread.
It's a good book.
Yes, it absolutely is. Oh goodness. I might dork out just a little bit and talk about the elements of style.
Oh yeah, that's totally fine. Hey, I'm all for dorking out or geeking out on things like writing, editing. Perfect.
Yep, exactly. I think I'm addicted to anything by Ann Patchett, there's so many amazing writers out there today. And I think that's the coolest thing right now is just there are so many amazing writers across every genre, across every space, and we can all kind of dip our toes into those waters if we work at it. So that's where I am.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And those are all great book recommendations, by the way. I always like to ask a couple questions about the editor first, and then we can jump into some other questions on like self-editing and kind of prepping your book and some more about your books as well a little bit later. But so what made you want to be an editor?
Right. So I was actually teaching college writing classes for a little while there. And I was teaching these classes and it was absolutely fabulous because it was this freshman level class where you were writing and you're like, okay, how is it different to write for an academic audience and write an essay? How is this different from writing a cover letter from your resume? How is this different from writing A poem? How is this different writing from writing a text message? How is this different from writing from writing, I don't know, just we were all over the place in Amazon product descriptions. We were just kind of playing all over the place for how do you write for your audience with a specific goal, hitting the right notes. And we just really played with this so much. And when I was teaching those college classes, people kind of kept coming up to me on the side and saying, you're really good with grammar. You're really good with storytelling. You're really good with knowing audience and hooking people in the right capacity. And through that, I just kind of started on the side doing, I think, what I've done since I was in high school, that, oh, you have a story? Let me see what I can help you with. And I started on the side, and it was in 2010 that I officially started my editing business.
Oh, cool.
And I've been doing it for, I guess, over a decade now, of just really helping people empower their stories. I used to do anything. Now I specifically focus on fiction.
Okay.
I handle most fiction. There's some genres I stay away from, because when you hire an editor, you need to make sure that the editor is an expert in what they're talking about.
Right.
I'm not a fantasy expert, and I'm not a science fiction expert. I'm not a horror or erotica expert. But outside of those kind of four-ish, I read voraciously pretty much everything else. So I work with fiction in most genres. But again, when you're hiring an editor, you need to know what that editor focuses on. Just like, and I'm sure your questions will get to this kind of stuff, you have to know what level of editing you're talking about, but also just to make sure that editor matches. So that's why I always like to be nice and clear from the front of where my fiction focus is, because fiction means so many things, right?
Yeah. So many things. That is so good to know. And so since you kind of touched on the genres that you really don't edit, what are your favorite genres to edit?
I absolutely adore book club fiction.
Okay.
So women's fiction, suspense, thrillers, mystery, romantic suspense, romance. I love YA. I love middle grade. See, this is what I'm talking about. It's hard to put me in a box. I love so much.
Right.
I don't go much lower than like a sixth grade level. So if someone's working on an early chapter book, it's not really where I focus. I don't know that niche of the market as well. I mean, I will happily read and love things, but not where I pick up clients.
Okay, with your editing experience, you've been doing it for over 10 years now. Like, did you go to did you take any classes on the editing, or is it kind of like just like this ingrained thing that's been inside of you for a long time? And what is it?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, because I get that question a lot of how do you become an editor? And it's like that, what is it? The 10,000 hours of practice at anything that you do, whether it's golfing, which I think that whole concept came out of,
Right.
or anything else. I think I have become an editor and a successful editor because of all of the practice runs I've done with this. As I said, I've been helping people's stories since friends from middle school, high school, but it really came to, I'm trained as, I was an English professor in college. I don't teach college classrooms anymore. I teach a lot of workshops, but I don't teach college classrooms anymore. So I do have my master's degree. I have a big education background, but I think especially when it comes down to grammar and punctuation and how you use a semicolon, I feel like some of this stuff slipped between the cracks of our formal education. I don't know. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I kind of do feel that way. I feel like enough time wasn't spent on those things, really.
Exactly.
You know? And then
Exactly.
I feel like I learned more after I got out of college, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Because I'm picking up books to learn and everything. And in class, they really didn't touch on that, which is kind of sad, actually.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, no matter what someone's career or job might be, we all communicate. We all use words. We all have to write a cover letter or an email to our boss or whoever it is. Words are basic. And this is where I just became overjoyed and perhaps slightly obsessive with getting into the etymology of why certain things are some ways, what are the rule breakers. And in 2012, and it was just the origin of this was really me goofing off with a bunch of my writer friends, where I wanted to just okay, guys, once and for all, let's get this right. The difference between further and farther, because these are two different words, and world it's time to know, right?
Yeah.
And so I just started goofing off with this stuff. Some of it is kind of teaching myself, but some of it was just kind of, okay, I keep seeing this typo.
Okay.
And so many people either get angry about grammar conversations, talking about grammar police and such, and other people just kind of fall over asleep. And we can
Yeah.
have those conversations without being angry or falling asleep.
Yeah.
And that's where that blog went. It's still going now. It's also kind of a podcast has grown out of it. I just today published, I think it was blog number 432 on that
Ooh, that's
blog.
exciting.
But
Good job.
it is, thank you. And it's just been really fun. And really, it was out of that blog that I got my first literary agent, or my literary agent, and my first book deal, because
That's
I was
cool.
just loving grammar and language and all of that.
That's wonderful. So you've definitely got a lot of experience and everything, and also this just love for it. I can tell when you're talking about it, you just get really excited, which is what people want when they need an editor. So someone that loves what they do. So that's good. That's good.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And so let's see here. So what kind of edits do you specialize in? Because I know there are different types of edits. And maybe before we jump into that question, can you just give a little snippet on the different types of edits that there are out there?
Yes, because the world needs to know, right?
Right.
I think this is my mission. It's all about what the world needs to know around
Right.
language. Okay. So when someone hits the end of their rough draft or their first complete baby manuscript that they feel so good about, we need to celebrate the heck out of that moment, because I mean, really, how many people want to write a book versus how many people actually do it, right? So that's kind of step one, I always say, just like throw up the semicolon shaped confetti. Step two.
Love that.
Step two is always to think about the editing in phases, or sometimes you can break it down into revision versus editing, or kind of phases like this, because when you finish your manuscript, you don't then go and look at punctuation. You don't then just go and look to make sure you have your subject verb agreement on every line, because before you get to any of that, you need to do kind of your big picture edit. Now, this is phase one, and I'll go through a couple different names. Your big picture edit, sometimes called your macro edit, sometimes called your story edit, sometimes called your developmental edit. These are all those really big things that no matter where you are, how accomplished of a writer you are, you need to start with that top level edit, because you don't want to spend so many hours working on the poetry of this single sentence when you realize that entire scene is going to be cut, and that beautiful, wonderful sentence is going to have to be deleted, because that's just heartbreaking, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So step one, stage one, is always that big level edit. That's that developmental. For myself, I definitely do developmental edits. I like to call them story critiques, because I don't know what it is that some people get nervous about when they hear developmental. I think some people think, well, that means that I'm just developing as a writer, and maybe that's for someone who's newer. Forget it. Developmental edits, that's the big picture edit. Don't ever take your ego into the editing experience, because everything can be better. What was it? Picasso said that everything can get better, and don't abandon your work before you do that big editing process. So developmental edit is number one. And then your next level, which you could call it, oh my goodness, this is where we go into terms again, phase two editing. So once your big one's done, so once your structure is perfect, once the beginning of your novel is in the right place, once the end is in the right place, once your characters have depth, once your point of view choices have been made, and all of your big ideas, and you're fleshed out with that balance between scenes that are dialogue, that have description in them, that have action in them, so you don't have these big sections of dialogue where the entire scene is talking, but it's like black movie screen because nothing else is going on. Those are all big issues.
Yep.
Then you get down to kind of phase two. I'm just talking so much.
Oh, no, that's really good.
I get excited
really good.
as you said.
Yeah, I love that.
So phase two is your micro edits. I like to call this a substantive edit. Sometimes people talk about copy editing in this phase, but in my opinion, copy editing is just like a tad smaller than what I'm going to talk about. Okay. This is where everything's in place, but now you want to refine your language. You want to empower every single sentence to make sure that is everything it can be. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say empower, I don't mean that every single person has to be a poet. We all have our own styles. We all have our own tones. But your goal as a writer in this competitive publishing marketplace is to make sure you don't sound like something that everybody has read 100 times before. You need to make sure you're not falling into cliches. You need to make sure that your language use isn't repetitive from chapter to chapter, that your character A sounds exactly like character B, which exactly has the same mannerisms as character C. And suddenly he's seeing the author come through the manuscript rather than the characters, and how distracting is that? So that's kind of your next level edit, is where you're really getting down to the nitty gritty details. And only after the macro and then the micro, then you really get down to grammar, and that's the copy editing. This is where you get to proofreading, that's final proofing, that line editing, those final stages. And honestly, I love digging into story and characters and composition and all of that. So I do the developmental edits, I do the macro, the micro, and I do a little bit of copy editing. But when it gets down to that final proofread, I used to do it, but honestly, it's not nearly as much fun as the other stuff. So I don't do it as much as I used to anymore. But really, I always have to say that no matter whether someone is pitching literary agents, whether you're going to New York publishers, whether you're going to small publishers, or even indie publishing yourself, hire that proofreader. I mean, I'm not the one, so this is not even a sales pitch for me, but get a line editor, proofreader to read your book at minimum, because we don't want those sloppy things holding back your chances, right?
Right. Yeah, that's wonderful. And thank you for going over that and everything. I feel like it's really good to kind of, sometimes when we glaze over it, it's really easy to think, okay, developmental, like what you were saying. It's like, well, what's that exactly mean? But now we kind of have a better understanding of that. So that's really good. Thanks for going into that. So when you work with an author or writer, someone that's never been published or someone that's been published, how does that look? Do they send the book to you, you go over it, send it back? Do they send it? Yeah. So how does it look working with a writer, if a writer's working with you?
Absolutely. Well, I have a couple different ways that I handle things. As I said, I have a couple different levels of edit that someone might sign on with me for. So first things first, we always have a phone call, or at least a comprehensive email back and forth at minimum. Just to make sure we're the right match for each other, just to make sure that they don't think they're hiring a ghostwriter, because an editor is not a ghostwriter. You don't hand over a rough manuscript and have an editor make all the things, and here is your publishable manuscript right back. That's not quite how it works. It's a back and forth partnership, as you said. So no matter where someone comes in with me, we make sure we're a good match, number one, because again, you have to make sure your editor is the right match for you, and someone who will not just be a cheerleader for your story, but someone who's willing to dive deep into that empowerment process. So I talk to that person, make sure we're a good match, and we decide on what level of edit their book needs. And sometimes that is a conversation in itself, where someone says, oh, I'm ready for a copy edit. And then I get into it, and maybe you're not ready for a copy edit, actually. Let's pull back and talk about these bigger ideas. So we make sure we're a match. And yes, once we actually start the process and have refined what I'm doing for that person, they would hand over a manuscript. And I always have probably about 2 weeks or so of kind of radio silence while I'm digging into the work. And that's really, really hard for some people, because they just handed over this work and they're just sitting there on pins and needles saying like, okay, I want it back. But it takes usually about 2 weeks-ish, depending on the manuscript, for me to flip it over and return back to them. And I always include a kind of half an hour, 1 hour consultation at the flip side of that edit. So they sit with it, they look over all of my edits within their manuscripts. Almost all of my edits come with kind of a traditional New York styled publishing letter comprehensive review of a book, which can be really 10 pages, single space, talking about anything from craft to this moment that's almost there but not quite there, and how we can play with different things. So I give back kind of the edited manuscript and then this critique letter. And then after they sit with that for a little bit, we have a phone call and kind of analyze what are the questions? Because sometimes, who was it? Neil Gaiman, I think, said, oh, I'm going to butcher this quote really badly. He said that an editor can't tell you how to fix a mistake. An editor can tell you where the mistake is. And I think it goes back to that idea of editors are not ghostwriters. You are the author. You know how to fix this. You just need to be nudged that hey, maybe this isn't quite working yet, but yet is the key word, because anything can be transformed.
Sure.
So then, yes, so some clients I have that we go through that process. I do a big review of their manuscript. We have a big phone call and they say, okay, I know what to do now. And they're off to the races.
Yay.
Others do that with me multiple times, where perhaps we start with a developmental and they do a massive rewrite, and then they come back to me and we do a substantive edit together where we're getting into really the language of it that I didn't do the first time. And then they come back to me again for a copy edit. I have some clients I work with once and some clients who I've worked with like 6-7 times, because we go through kind of a 3-stage process with every single book that they're working on. But yes, depends. It's a flexible process, but as you said, it's a partnership. So it has to be a relationship that kind of keeps going as the author wants.
Oh, totally. That totally makes sense. And I like how you kind of have it where, it depends on the writer and what works for them. If it's that one time or if it's that 3-prong approach, just to have you walk them through the editing process of, that developmental and then the next step. And I'm sure that really does help to the writer. I mean, help them see like, okay, this is what I need to do for all future books. And I can see how that would really help a situation.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite things to put at the end of that kind of critique letter that I give back with all of my edits is a reading list, which you started this with. What are some of your favorite books?
Yep.
Because I read so much across so many different genres.
Right.
Sometimes when I read a manuscript, it reminds me a whole lot of an author who accomplishes this one thing amazingly. So at the end of all of that, I usually give people 2, 3, 4 books that you don't have to read these whole things, but look at how this author balances this really amazing setting amidst this action moment. Look at how this author does page 1, and just kind of things that are related specifically to that client's book, because I don't have just like, these are my 5 things I recommend. It's always related specifically to the genre or issue specifically that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that is wonderful. That's great. And I mean, if you're reading a lot too, like I read a lot as well. So I'm just like, I always like hearing what other people read, but you can learn so much from books. And so it's so cool that you do add those reading lists in there, because we can learn so much from other people's writing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Being a good writer, you have to be a good reader, and you have to read like a writer, not just enjoying your audiobooks, not just enjoying whatever is on the page in front of you. You have to look at how did that author do down? What is it that they're doing to make that effect,
Right. Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. I love that. Love that you touched on that. That's really important, I think. So perfect. Okay. And so let's see here. What are your strengths that you believe that you have when it comes to editing? So these are things that might set you apart from another editor.
Sure. I think, as I mentioned, I love really diving deep into story and looking at story logic about story, where it's falling into cliches that you may not even realize this is a cliche. A whole lot of new books do this.
Okay.
I think because for over a decade, I see a lot of early manuscripts. So I have a lot of experience with perhaps what literary agents or readers might be seeing, that everybody loves the word smile when they're nervous, and they're smiling when they're happy, and they're just go-to writer quirks that we don't realize that we fall into habits, that our characters are maniacally smiling all over the place. And there's nothing wrong with smiling. Clearly, I'm a smiley person.
Yeah.
But sometimes if our characters smile too much, character differentiation is weakened. And I don't know, all of these things about over use of using the eyes, and you're glancing and staring and looking and all of these things, where, people move so much more beyond their face.
Yeah.
So like, how can we get into mannerisms that are more specific? So I think kind of that's my strength, is because I've seen so many early draft manuscripts. I can point out not only just the cliches of early manuscripts, but also here's what first draft ideas sometimes look like. And here's how first draft ideas come onto the page and how you can step beyond that.
Okay, that's really good. Really good that those things are spotted. Like, because I've even done the whole smile thing before, or the eyes looking, or
we all do,
right?
And it's just kind of the first thing that pops into our mind. Nothing wrong with that. Never feel bad about rough draft words or even
No.
words that end up in your final manuscript. But as we grow as writers, then we start catching ourselves that, oh, I have a go-to phrase that I always use and maybe I need to stop saying. For me, it is couldn't help but. My characters couldn't help but do things all the time. I have no idea why this one little phrase is everywhere, but I'm aware. But yes, we all have our phrases that we don't always kind of bring our own awareness to. So it's nice to have other sets of eyes to say, by the way, do you know all of your characters say this one thing and people don't realize it?
That is so funny, but so true. Oh my goodness. Perfect. So then do you use a style guide as well?
Right. I use the Chicago Manual of Style,
Okay.
which is kind of generally what the traditional publishing world does use. Highly, highly recommend it. Everyone needs to have that proofreader, that line editor, depending on how you're publishing, you will, and they will follow the Chicago Manual of Style in that, in the fiction world.
Yep.
But yes, wonderful. I can tell you all about punctuation within those quotation marks and where that should be and all of those little subtleties.
Oh, totally. No, that's good. And do you recommend that writers have a Chicago style manual of style so that they can actually reference these things, or do you think it's not something that they need?
I think they need to know, but I don't think you need to necessarily spend the money on it. I mean, you can, Google is your friend, honestly, and they have a wonderful website too. Just know if you're looking at which rule should you be abiding by with that Oxford comma, keep it or lose it. Just make sure which format you should be using. And right, there are a lot of great resources. Just make sure you're using trustworthy resources online and make sure you're using resources that are native to who you want your audience to be. Because if you are working in the United States and using a British style guide or using a website of writing tips from England, their subtleties are going to be different, or even Canada. But then again, I have people who I know in England who use American style guides like the Chicago of Manual Style because they imagine their audience to be more American. So it depends.
Yeah, that is really good. That's good information to know and everything. I know that I lived in Australia for a while. My husband, I met him there. But so yeah, that's one thing. There's a spelling differences. There's so much that's different between the English and the British version.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's big differences and sometimes they're even just small. So that's really good to note that as well.
Exactly. Like the difference between toward and towards, like, do you put an S there or do you not put an S? I mean, all of these subtle things that we don't even realize are really big differences.
Yeah.
And they are.
Exactly.
And the American actually cuts the S in case anyone's curious. It should technically be toward in American English.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Cool. And so now we can kind of jump into that self-editing and stuff. Can you share with me some of your best tips for self-editing your manuscript so that it's, that you can prep it for an editor and everything?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I always like to tell people to think about their book in terms of kind of the mission of your book and the vision of your book. And maybe this is a little too woo-woo, but I swear it works. It totally works. So your vision of your book is kind of like, what do you want your readers to take away? Like, what's the lesson? What are all the feels? Like, what do you want to have the emotional reaction or the logical reaction at the end of your book?
Yep.
But then there's the mission of your book, which is different. When someone's talking about what actually happens in your book, this is your mission. This is where you can see if you can put down into one sentence, here's what my book is about. And so if you can actually in one sentence, maybe two, but really in one sentence, get your entire basis of your book into one sentence. I like to call that your book's mission. Okay. And then look at all of the chapters of your book from chapter one by one, and say, is this on mission with my book? And by asking yourself, am I on mission? You'll notice like, okay, I'm on point, I'm on point. And then you notice this chapter 17, where suddenly your character is involved with a sniper and the sniper is taking them on this chase. And this is a romantic, wonderful Hallmark movie book. And there should not be a sniper in this book. And it's a silly little exercise. But there were snipers in this era. So let's talk about that. And I ran for like 50 pages. And the second while I was doing it, I knew it was completely off brand. It was off mission for the project, but it was really fun to write. And sometimes we don't catch ourselves with those. So know your vision for your book, what you want it to accomplish, but know your mission. What is kind of that one sentence of what your book is about? And just double check at the core of every single chapter of your book that you're on mission. And really, if you want to go even deeper, you can look at every single scene of your book. Is it on mission? If you want to go from you're on point, because we all wander sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good.
Other exercises I love doing with the character, and it's with characters. And it's funny because this is something you could do before or you could do it after. I sometimes like doing it after, because as we're writing rough drafts, we're about to be photobombed by a cat, by the way. So heads up.
That's totally fine. I've got two, so I'm used to that.
Nice. I just got a little nudge in the side over here. So one thing I love to do with characters, and again, this is something you can do before you write, but it's sometimes fun to do after you write also, is to think about how do your different characters respond to emotion. And it goes back to that idea of smiling too much, that you can smile to be nervous, you can smile when you're laughing, you can smile when you're falling in love. But every person is different. How you react to things is different from how I react to things. So sometimes I really like looking through a manuscript for all of my emotion words. Where are every single place that I say someone is happy or sad or depressed or nervous and all of this? Right. Because how you react to nervous is different from how I react to nervous. And it's different from how character C, D, E, F reacts to happy or sad or nervous or depressed, or name any given emotion.
Right.
So what I like to tell people is to actually kind of sketch this out on paper and think, again, beyond the smiles, beyond the eyes, think beyond the facial expressions. But what are your characters' tells? Think about poker game tells. Yeah. And everybody has them. And if you just pay attention to your family members or sit down in a coffee shop, look around and you can see the people who hunch, the people who are always fidgeting, the people who play with their hair, the people who have different posture or different body movements, or people who will constantly be kicking a pebble if they're walking down the road. We all have go-tos. And it's really fun to kind of figure out how are these little go-to mannerisms tells that can help our reader more closely connect with our characters. Because imagine the people in your life. If someone walks into the room with you right now, they don't need to hold up a sign and say, I had a really bad day. Yeah. They wouldn't need that sign. And because you know that person, you know by looking at them, by the way they're carrying themselves and what they're doing, how they feel in that moment. And you as an author have the challenge and opportunity to connect your readers that closely with your characters, so that way you know that if this person is sitting there and she crosses her arms and leans forward and looks down, then you'll know that she had a really rough day, or you'll know that's her go-to because she's super nervous, or you'll know whatever it is. But by creating these kind of character tells and by creating a cheat sheet for yourself on what character does what with what emotion, you can then go through your entire manuscript and delete every single happy, sad, nervous, and you can have a manuscript with no usages of emotions at all, but you can still have a very emotional, rich, and real manuscript, which is really fun.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, that also helps with that showing and telling. Then you're showing that emotion instead of telling she was happy or sad or angry, but then you see it. I love that. That's a really good, helpful pointer. I think that many writers will be helped out with.
Good. Yes. And there's so many things, because you don't want a reader to be sitting back as this audience hearing a story. You want the reader invested in the moments and being a detective and following the clues along with that person. It doesn't have to be a mystery to follow the clues. Sometimes the clues are just how you show a character, and the reader's just fully invested. And that's your job as an author, right? So there's so many ways to kind of play with that. That's I teach so many webinars and classes on this type of subject. That's actually where my second book came from.
Oh, cool.
This is the novel editing workbook. And it really is a whole bunch of 105 exercises and questions about how do you boot camp your own rough draft to take it through these steps to really make sure you make it the most polished creation that you can. Because you put in the work and you can do it. You can be that awesome writer you want to be, but you just have to put in the work. And unfortunately, editing is a big piece of that heavy lift. People don't want it to be, but it is.
It is. Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. And so the difference between your books, can you just tell us the difference and what they
Absolutely.
focus on, just so people know?
Absolutely. So my first book came out in 2017, and this was my surprise book that as I said, I have loved storytelling and empowering stories for as long as I could remember, but I was goofing off with the blog. And this blog somehow exploded. If you go to KrisSpisak.com, and I realized that's super hard to spell. So you can also go to getagriponyourgrammar.com. I have a redirect there.
Perfect.
And my blog is still going, and I was goofing off with language skills, and my blog exploded. And there's a big long story there that I will save for another day, but it became this book published by Career Press. And in this book, so it's everything from punctuation to subtle word choices that we should have learned in middle school, but maybe didn't know the difference between, if you want to affect change in the world, how do you spell that word affect? Oh my gosh. And then you're thinking, oh wait, the verb form is with an A, except for that is an exception. So affecting change is actually with an E. Oh my goodness. So much fun, right? Okay, so
that's funny.
This is all about word choice, punctuation, idioms that are commonly messed up. There's a section on business communications, and there's a section on storytelling tips and tricks. So this is really your all over communication guide. My favorite review of this one is that it is a elements of style for the Twitter generation, because hopefully it's entertaining as well. Because as I said, my goal is to not have anyone fall asleep or get angry. We can have fun and talk about Beyonce and Gwen Stefani while we talk about writing tips, right?
Why not, right?
My next one that came out, this is the novel editing workbook. And this one really came out of the fact that I was teaching so many workshops on how do you do this boot camp with your own manuscript and take it through the macro edit, the micro edit, the proofread, like how can an author do this themselves? And that's where this one came out. This one came out 2 weeks pretty much before COVID shut down the world. So the launch of this book at a brewery was like my last event with people before COVID. So I have very fond memories of the launch of this book. But it was a big grammar party, right? Big storytelling party.
Yeah.
And then the last one that's out so far is the Family Story Workbook, which is a guide that you can use whether you are someone who has ever wanted to write your family story and you want to capture that before family members are gone, whether you're someone who's ever wanted to write your own life story, but just you haven't ever known how do you start that process, whether you're a memoirist, or even if you're a fiction writer and you're really trying to get down to emotional depths or sensory details that are specific. So not a bedroom, but getting down to the specifics of what's in your childhood bedroom, because you can think of all of those little things.
Yeah.
So I've heard people really appreciating this book in places that I haven't even thought of using when it came together. Cool. But yeah, I've been hearing a lot of fiction writers using this too for just digging into depths of emotion and details and really plotting and storytelling, and how sometimes events don't have to be a gun at a store. Sometimes an event can be something incredibly traumatic, but small in certain ways. And people have been using this book for that.
Oh, cool.
And yes, those are my writing reference books.
Oh, cool. Yay. That's awesome. And so what gave you the idea for the family history one?
A lot of it actually did come out of the pandemic. At the very beginning of the pandemic, I was doing a YouTube writing prompt series on, okay, guys, we're living through history right now. Let's write down all of these specifics so we don't forget what it was like to walk into a grocery store and not have any toilet paper and, and all of this stuff. Yeah. So I was reading, so I was leading all of this. And my novel that's coming out next year, a lot of it is pulled from some family background that I've been trying to figure out how to learn more about and tell a story of since I was really in elementary school and getting fascinated by these stories. Cool. And in writing that novel, I learned so much about my own family. And that being said, the novel is nothing about my family. It just took kind of a contemporary American sisters, but also it's looking back on World War II Ukraine, which is a story that's not really told, and that's my family background. So I got to learn about so much through that process of writing, and I loved it. And I really was interviewing my family, and all of these things were coming out. And I realized how valuable of an exercise that was for me as I was writing. But just during the pandemic, we all had questions, and we are losing people, and it's scary. And how can we capture that? So that's where that last story came. It's creative writing, storytelling.
Oh, that's just so powerful, Kris. I love that. I love too that like how you're like bringing the history into. I feel like we could just geek out about all that stuff like so easily if you gave us more than an hour. But it's so awesome.
Right.
I love that. I just
Thank
love
you.
that you put that together like for your like probably figuring out your own history too when you're writing that, like, and then you have it in your novel. Like, oh my gosh, that makes me so excited. I can't wait to read your book.
Thank you.
Oh, that's super, super exciting. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing those with me. And everything.
Absolutely.
Where can writers and people that want to find an editor, where can they find you online?
Absolutely. So you can go to krisspisak.com, which I realize my name is impossible to spell because it's not phonetic. So you can also go to getagriponyourgrammar.com. And again, that's just based on the title of my first book. And that will bring you to not only my books, but also my webinars that I usually have, editing webinars that are ongoing. Okay. That'll bring you to my ongoing blog. Today, actually, I just posted one on the difference when someone says that doesn't jive with me, or is it that doesn't jibe with me? Like, what's the word? Because you see it incorrect all the time. So
yes,
it's just all these little things. And you can also sign up for my newsletter at getagriponyourgrammar.com, because every month I put out writing tips, exercises, language trivia, etymology stories, all the fun.
Cool. Yeah, why not? That's super cool. Well, thank you so much, Kris.
Thank you so much for having me, Devin. Seriously, you know, I geek out on this stuff.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad that you had so much fun, and I really would love to do something like this again sometime in the future if you would ever be interested. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You too. And again, I love your website and all the stuff you're doing. So great work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means so much. So thank you.